You're very welcome to this very short video, which is part of the Moving from Burnout to Flourishing in Clinical Settings series. My name is Dr. Pádraic Dunne, and I'm a member of the RCSI Centre for Positive Psychology and Health. So in this very short video, we're going to discuss very briefly how we might be able to make habits stick. In other words, make habits sustainable over a period of time. Now, it's really important to capture how long it actually does take to make a habit. And these researchers at University College London have very kindly provided us with a number. And it turns out that the mean or the median number in terms of when a habit becomes relatively unconscious and ultimately sticky is 66 days. So that means you can be unlucky and it can take you 200 days, or you can be very lucky and you might make the habit stick after 2 weeks. The bottom line here is 66 days is the mean number. Now, in terms of habit in general, there are lots of good material out there online, lots of very good research groups right around the world. If you're interested in this type of area, I would recommend these two books. I think they're quite readable and very informative. But I'm going to talk to you very briefly really about a number of different sections and how we advise patients and clients and ourselves to make habits stick, which hopefully you'll find readily accessible and relatively simple. And it's generally based on a number of components where we make a habit change checklist. So a behavior change checklist that I'm going to get you to go through with a pen and a piece of paper at the end of this video. And it's broadly speaking based on the work by Neil and colleagues from Duke University in the US. 6 essential strategies for habit. And this particular image here is adapted from thebearchitects.com. So for me, one of the very useful and most useful tools in terms of helping myself generate a sticky habit, or patients, clients, and a research context is using the habit loop, which really is a selection of triggers, routines, and rewards that help us generate a new habit. Now, if we look, as I said, at the anatomy of a habit loop, we find the trigger, which moves into a routine, and the circle is complete with the reward itself. And one of the best ways to dissect the anatomy of the habit loop is to look at a negative habit loop, and in this particular case, smoking. So if we look at the trigger when people were working in the workplace, and hopefully they will get to again soon, a trigger might have been 11 a.m. for example. So 11 a.m. the work break happens, the individual who smokes walks down to the smoking area, lights up a cigarette, and the rewards in this context are a biochemical nicotine hit and what may be in some cases social interaction. So habits are quite complex, as I'm sure you're well aware of, and smoking might not just be about nicotine. Obviously, the biggest player in smoking addiction is nicotine, but there may be a social interaction component here in this habit loop that I'm describing. So the bottom line is we have a trigger, which is 11 a.m., we have a routine where the individual walks to the smoking area, and then we have a reward that the brain receives, in this case, nicotine and or social interaction. So now let's look at a more positive loop. And again, I've spoken about attention-based training in the main talk attached to this series. And I'm going to give you an example here of how you might set up a morning meditation practice, for example. So let's say in this context, we have a trigger, which is 6:30 a.m. in the morning. Our timer goes off. We might have a nice meditation space in the kitchen. It might be a shed out the back. It might be a basement. It might be a space in your attic. It might be your bedroom. It might be your local park. Wherever it is, the routine is to walk to wherever you engage in this meditation practice. And then you set your timer for 2 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever you decided. You engage your practice. Your timer goes off, and now it's time to reward the dog with a doggy biscuit. The brain requires a reward for engaging in an act if we want to make a sustainable habit. For me, I like my coffee in the morning. It's very important to me, so I would reward my brain in this context with a nice cup of coffee. And obviously you can do the same thing or replace it with something else that you're interested in the morning time. But this completes the habit loop of a positive meditation practice in the morning, for example, where we have a trigger, 6:30, the routine is walk to the area that we've decided to meditate in, and the reward after the timer goes off is a nice coffee. Now, it's really important here that you develop different habit loops for different contingencies and different eventualities. So what I mean by that is you will need a different habit loop in the morning than you will from the evening time. Why is that? Well, I certainly would not be able to reward myself in the evening with a coffee because I wouldn't sleep at night. So for example, an evening meditation habit loop here might be 8:30 p.m. The routine might be the same, walking to the kitchen, engaging in your practice. And then the reward here might be a nice hot cup of cocoa or hot chocolate, or it might be a Netflix show, whatever it might be, you decide yourself. But we need to give the dog a doggy biscuit, give the brain a dopamine hit, reward it for a job well done. And that over time, remember the median being 66 days, will develop the sticky habit. Now, if you happen to have a normal working week, 5-day working week, and you're off at the weekend, well, then you need a different habit loop for the weekend. Again, a different eventuality, because most people get up later at the weekend. So now you have different trigger times. You might want to engage in your practice in a different space, for example, so a different routine. You might want to reward yourself differently at the weekend, for example. Likewise, if you're on vacation, you need a habit loop for that. So you anticipate changes in your lifestyle and you develop a habit loop accordingly. You do it with a pen and paper because that helps the habits stick. If also, for example, you're engaging in a work-related conference and it's a midweek conference, again, you're leaving at different times, you're probably waking at different times, you've got different routine. Now your meditation space is not there anymore, you need to create a new one, so you need a new habit loop. Habit loops for every eventuality. Have your notebook, write them out. They will help you generate a sticky habit. So the other component of this, as far as I'm concerned, that's really important is how you develop the behavior change checklist. And I'm going to give you a list of tasks here. I need you to write them down in a notebook, check them off. Once you've got them all checked off, well, then you know you've got a strong chance of making this habit stick in the long term, making it sustainable. So, number 1 in the behavior change checklist, have you ensured or created a stable, supportive environment or context for the new habit? Now, this might seem obvious. In fact, all of these things will seem obvious, but humans tend to sabotage new habits, so we need to be very careful and make sure that this checklist is set in stone. What do I mean by creating a stable, supportive environment? So, for example, if you're trying to generate a new habit practice and you have young children, and you're trying to practice in the morning at 7:30 a.m. when everybody's getting breakfast or getting ready to go to school or whatever it might be, and the house is chaotic, you are not going to be able to develop a new meditative practice where you need some level of quiet. It's not going to happen. So instead, that stable environment in that context, it could be getting up a little bit earlier, like 6:30, as I suggested before, or it might be that you have a shed in the garden, or it might be that you have a nice basement that you can get away from everybody. Or, as I said, you go to the park, or you do it in the car park outside work, or you do it in work. Bottom line is you create a supportive environment where you can do and engage this behavior every time as best as possible. Here's an interesting point that's not always relevant or relative to what's happening at that time in your life. And it is all about leveraging changes in life. But again, there's not always changes going on in anybody's life at any given moment. Now, the examples of being able to leverage opportunities are, for example, moving house, switching job, maybe the end of a relationship, the start of a new relationship. A global pandemic has offered many, many millions of people the chance to change lifestyle in certain contexts, but it's not always possible to do this. But the point is that if you are aware of any life-changing opportunities, like if you are changing job, well, then that's a perfect moment to capture and create new habits, because that change will help you to piggyback the new habits on the existing change model. So what about piggybacking? Because I just mentioned piggybacking. We all have existing habits. So an example of a strong habit that most people have is brushing your teeth or flossing your teeth, for example. So if you want to piggyback a new habit, let's say your meditation practice, you can piggyback the new habit on an old habit by inserting it after, not before, after the existing habit. So if you have a strong toothbrushing habit, you brush your teeth, let's say you're going to practice in a room adjacent to your bathroom where you brush your teeth, well, you brush your teeth, and then you engage in the meditative practice immediately afterwards. So that's an example of piggybacking. It can be very helpful. You need to make it easy. Again, this sounds very obvious, but it's not always obvious. You need to make it easy. So for example, if you have a new running behavior that you want to generate, and you only have a pair of flip-flops and a pair of work shoes, and you've no running shoes, well, we're going to have a problem. You're not making this new behavior easy. If you want to run in a local park, and you always forget to put your running gear into the boot of the car or to put it in a bag to bring with you, that's not making the habit easy. Again, pen and paper, figure out how you can make this habit easy. Create the stable and supportive environment. Remember that. Have you created the multiple habit loops that I suggested? Remember, the working week, the weekend, the vacation time, family events, conferences, all those sorts of things. Different loop for each one. Put pen to paper. Have you ensured a mix of short, medium, and long-term rewards? So we know about the coffee that we spoke about, the Netflix show, the hot cup of hot chocolate, for example. But what about medium goals and rewards? So maybe you want to go on a weekend away, for example, to a B&B after a month of engaging in this new habit. Or maybe you have a long-term one set that you're going to go on a really nice vacation once you've spent a long time, maybe 6 months engaging in this behavior. So that kind of thing. But again, don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it up in your head. Put pen to paper. Make sure you record it. Have you created opportunity to try out the practice? So one way of doing this is actually to tell all your friends and relatives and colleagues that you're engaging in this habit. You never know, you might meet somebody who's in a running club, or you might meet somebody who's into meditation and they go to a group practice every week, for example. The other part of this is telling everybody you know what you're doing, so that when you meet Mike in the corridor next week, Mike says, how's your meditation practice going? And you get, it's not going that great. And you know you're going to meet Mike again next week. So there's that little bit of motivation to try and engage your practice because you know people are going to ask you about it. Finally, and probably the most important, is you need to find out what the motivation is behind this habit change. What's the meaning and purpose to this? For example, we could have an individual who wants to quit smoking because they want to be alive for their grandkids to be born and experience life around grandkids. That's a very good reason for doing that. If you can create behavior change to motivation and meaning, especially ones linked to emotions and other people, then the chances of making it sticky are much greater. Finally, I'll say, be self-compassionate. We're all human beings. We all fall off the horse. We fall off the wagon. Vow to get up again and start again the next day. Start anew. Start fresh. Everybody fails. We all fall off the wagon. Be self-compassionate. Don't kick yourself for making a mistake or not practicing. Just vow to do it again the next day. In other words, engage your new habit. So thank you for listening to this short meditation. And again, if you need any more information on any of our videos or any of our content, please visit the website at rcsi.com/positive psychology. Thank you.